The information contained in the video content posted to this site represents the views and opinions of the original creators of such video content and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the South Puget Intertribal Planning Agency. The mere appearance of such video content on this site does not constitute an endorsement by SPIPA or its affiliates of such video content. The video content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. SPIPA does not make any representation or warranties with respect to the accuracy, applicability, fitness, or completeness of the video content. SPIPA does not warrant the performance, effectiveness, or applicability of any sites listed or linked to in any video content. The video content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek professional advice with any questions you may have regarding the subject of this video content. SPIPA hereby disclaims any and all liability to any party for any direct, indirect, implied, punitive, special, incidental, or other consequential damages arising directly or indirectly from any use of the video content, which is provided as is and without warranties. The production of this video content was supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families. Its content does not necessarily represent the official views or opinions of HHS and ACF.
I was saying, you guys, that we're talking about transition to online learning, and it's a huge issue, as you can imagine, with almost everyone right now. But I also want you to have perspective that it's really out of perspective in terms of what a struggle it is for people right now, because everything that is sort of life challenges right now is out of perspective. So because of COVID, because of the intense political climate, because of the Black Lives Matter stuff, now of course we've got the environmental stuff with the smoke. And so with all of those kinds of things that have been playing literally for months, it's like our perspective on normal life struggles of any kind are absolutely amplified. So I just want to say to keep in mind for yourselves that what feels really big and really overwhelming is probably not as big and overwhelming and as serious as it feels to you in the moment. So that's my little preface to this. The other thing I want to preface, and if people have a pen and pencil, this is probably worth writing down. So the state board came out with what they consider their guidelines for maximum student participation in online kinds of learning, and that includes handouts that they're getting, printed handouts they're getting, and online teaching kinds of material they're getting. And so write this down. So for kindergarten and first graders, they expect maximum of 45 minutes of attendance. For second and third graders, they're talking about 60 minutes maximum attendance. So this is maximum that their expectation of commitment is per student. For fourth and fifth graders, 90 minutes is their maximum. 6th through 8th grade, it's 20 minutes per class, which comes out about 2.5 hours if you figure it per class. And 9th through 12 is 30 minutes per class, which comes out about 3 hours a day. So those are the expectations that the state has for students to attend to their online learning. And that's maximum expectation. So I want this really clear so that some of that pressure that parents are feeling about this, and possibly students who are struggling with online learning, that this is the actual guidelines that the state is putting out. So questions about that before we start?
Do you have a handout with those state recommendations that we can put in the chat?
What I'll do is I will have Kim. Who should I have Kim send it out to? I can send a copy to Kim, and then I can have her forward it to somebody. Who's the best person to forward it to get it to you guys?
Forward it to me.
Okay, I'll forward it to you, Julie, and then you can distribute it as you need to.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yes, absolutely. So questions about that at all? Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Candice. I guess my question would be then, I feel like schools are requiring a lot more than what your expectation just is right there. So how do you combat that when the school?
I don't know. I think it's good for you guys to have a copy of this, because I was really surprised as well when they sent this copy to me, which I'm really grateful they did, because parents are struggling with trying to get their kids to attend, you know, to actually stay online and attend and stay focused, etc. And so I was surprised, because I know that they are getting messages that the expectation is higher than that, or some of them are getting the expectation is higher. I think it's going to be helpful if we have copies of that, because then you guys can give forward that to your parents, who then can, you know, give it to the principal or to the teacher, whoever they might be communicating with about this struggle, or how much time they're able to really keep their kids focused, etc. So yeah, so I think having that literally coming from the state could be helpful, to have that communication. Does that answer your question, April?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anyone else before I move on with this?
We have a couple of questions in the chat box. The first one is, are these the max for just online virtual, or includes homework as well?
That's a good question. I was wondering the same thing. And I don't know. It's the way it's written. And let me see if I can read specifically the way it's written. I'm trying to get on my phone to read the exact email that it came in. The way it was written, you guys, is word for word is, the guideline below are meant for any delivery model, printed learning materials, online programs, or combination of both. So it doesn't specifically say homework, so I don't know if that, that's a good question. I don't know if that expectation is. I would assume no, is what my assumption would be, but I think it's worth checking.
Okay. The next question was techniques for parents to advocate for their children and themselves with this max guidelines.
Yeah, let's ask, I don't know who that's from, but I have a section in here where it talks about talking to teachers in the system. So let's see if that's enough to answer that question. If it's not, whoever asked that, please feel like you can ask it again and we can have that discussion. Okay, anyone else before we move on? Okay, so I want to be really clear. This is transition to online school, and it's both, we're going to talk about it in both practical and psychologically, for both parents and for children, because at this point, for most of you, it's pretty interactive. Parents are, having to participate pretty actively. So I want to talk, first of all, about practical strategies and emotional considerations. So the first thing is setting the stage. What we do know is the kids who actually manage this the best actually have the stage set for as close to a learning kind of environment as possible. So it's best if you can find a designated space, even if that is just a small table in a corner of a room. It doesn't have to be a full room or anything like that, but it needs to be a designated space that is literally only used for school, ideally. And so some people have even been doing like cardboard heavy-duty cardboard boxes in a corner and that kind of thing. But what we're looking for are all of the outside structures that sort of set the that kids are familiar with, that sort of set the stage for them to attend. Part of the problem with online schooling is all the distractions that they get, plus they just aren't getting sort of the familiar cues about attending to material that they would get in a school setting. So we're trying to duplicate that. It would include ideally a table or desk with paper, pencils, markers. Some people recommend having a separate sort of cozy reading nook or a project space separate where they would do large projects or artwork. So depending on what you have for availability, the more you can sort of set the space up to appear to be similar to what they're familiar with in actual on-site learning, the better. Again, trying to minimize distractions, so not having it in a space where they have other siblings running around or have technology that would be distracting, when we'll talk more about technology in a bit. And then the other thing that seems to really help and reinforce the learning they found is to have some form of displaying their completed work or artwork, etc. That could just be a string hung by a couple of thumbtacks on a wall for you to hang papers on when they're done. So having some way to display their art or their completed work seems to have an impact on how easy or how well they focus. So that's what the physical environment looks like that we're trying to achieve. So questions about that? Anyone? Okay. Second thing you want to look at is really sort of resetting, and I'm saying resetting because with COVID and what happened in terms of spring and online learning in the spring, as well as what's happened all summer long, that a lot of the normal or regular rituals and routines for physical well-being, for the best outcome, got sort of displaced just as a survival, just because of survival. So it's really resetting again what the expectation is around health practices to get the best possible outcomes we can. So first one is sleep, and that one has been so disrupted, as well as sort of a sense of time, that it's important now that we start to work with kids that they go to bed and they get up at the same time every day. So even those of you who have kids who have 2 days of school or 3 days of school and 2 days off, they would still have that ritual and routine every day. What we know is how the brain sets for sleep is that number one impact is what time they get up every morning. And so ideally you want them to get up about the same time every morning, regardless if they have online school that day or not, that they would get up and start that routine of homework or whatever it might be on that other day, of those other days. So rising at the same time daily is really big. Now that also means probably going to bed about the same time daily. And the reason I say that is because the other thing we're looking for is 9 hours of sleep. And that is minimum for the young ones. Some of those kids need, 10 or 11 hours of sleep. But if we can get 9, we're okay with it. It does mean 9 hours all the way through high school. And one of the issues we have, even before online learning and COVID, was that we know that high school and middle schoolers, but particularly high schoolers, are incredibly sleep deprived around and in terms of the amount of sleep they should be getting. They should be getting 9 to 9.5 hours of sleep every night. And a lot of the high schoolers are getting anywhere between 6.5 and 7 hours of sleep every night, which means they are constantly in sleep deprivation, which has a huge impact on their ability to stay focused. And we need even more focus for online learning than we did probably in on-site learning. So really trying, if you can, to work with your kids about getting enough sleep and having regular sleep cycles. Okay, questions about sleep. Okay, so the next one obvious is nutrition. So just being sure that they're getting regular meals, regular snacks. Remembering that your kids are getting snacks, if they're young especially, throughout the day at school. Oftentimes they get at least one snack a day and sometimes two snacks a day. So they should be having breakfast before they start their online learning, ideally. And then a snack at one of the breaks, which we'll talk about breaks in a minute. A snack at a break, back to online learning, snacking again. Depending on how distracted kids get, it's okay, since you're home, to be able to have snacks just sitting on their learning space if it's a snack that's not particularly distracting and it doesn't seem to distract them, that they can just reach over and grab some snacks. So we're looking for nutritionally rich snacks, ideally fruits and protein, etc. So, and then the other one that a lot of people are leaving out is plenty of hydration, because a lot of the kids would come in from their recess breaks, which you have to remember are 3 times a day. They would come in from recess and lunch breaks, and almost always those kids would stop at a water fountain or in the where they have access in their rooms and drink water. At home, they don't have that same visual reminder of sort of that group mentality. So having a water bottle handy that they have that visual cue to take drinks throughout the day can make a big difference, because kids who are dehydrated don't focus as well. So we're looking at hydration and nutrition. So questions about that piece. All right, and then the third piece about the physical impact would be exercise. And right now, particularly, obviously, this is particularly challenging because it was hard enough with just dealing with COVID, but until the smoke becomes less intense, a lot of people are kept inside because of the smoke. But your goal will be to be sure your kids get physical exercise every day. And that ideally would be built into their school routine. And I'll talk about more about how that would look. And ideally outside. So in the natural world, ideally, because we know that the natural world also decreases anxiety. So we were looking for natural world, outside physical activity. And then, and that would be at the times we call brain breaks, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that's the expectation of the physical environment, as well as the physical practices, physical needs that would set kids up for the best outcome in terms of online learning. So anybody around that at this point? Okay, so some guidelines for this. Focus more on routine than rigid structure. And I think I'm really grateful that that information came in from the state to me, because what that means by focus on routine is that whole idea of we are going to get up, we're going to get ready, we're going to have breakfast, we're going to get online. And then whatever those routines are throughout the day. When I say versus a rigid structure, is that I want people to keep that routine, and it takes literally weeks of time, you guys, to get this integrated. So it's important, even when it feels like it's not working very well, to keep the routine. Now, when I say not a rigid structure, so even though there'll be a 45-minute lecture, if your kids can only do 10, 20 minutes of it because they're first and second graders, you're okay. You're still keeping your routine, but you might be more flexible about your structure. So at that point, you might, go and sit in your reading corner and read quietly for a while, so that you're playing with that same routine every day. And we'll talk about what those things are, and then you can have some flexibility around it. So regularity in space, regularity in supply organization. So every day you're reorganizing your supplies. Some visual form of their schedule is a really good idea. So literally having a daily and sometimes a weekly schedule printed out or written out on a Post-it that they can look at on their desk or their table that they're working from every day. For small kids, that could look like pictures with a schedule on it that helps them sort of keep that sense of ritual and routine. It's one of the hardest things about online learning is that in on-site learning, you have that structure built in at school, and with recesses and the whole school doing it and a whole group of kids doing it. So it's easier when you have that pack mentality to really keep those rituals and routines. Much harder when you're online and there's just a child or a couple of kids. So really work at trying to keep your routines while at the same time being flexible about what you're doing around the schedule and the structure. So be sure there's time for practicing reading and math. And practicing reading and math could look like cooking, for example. So if they are working on fractions, it doesn't mean you have to sit down and pound on a piece of paper with them. If you see that they're losing sort of focus, then that would be a time when you may go up and bake and start working on half cups, quarter cups, teaspoons, etc. So they're working with fractions from a different perspective. So be sure that you're giving them both. Now, we talk a lot about brain breaks, and if you've heard your teachers talk about brain breaks, which probably a lot of them are because it's one of the things that they've been really working on in their trainings around curriculum this summer, are brain breaks. And there needs to be brain breaks every 45 minutes. There shouldn't be a longer period of time than 45 minutes where they're supposed to stay focused on something. When that brain break comes, ideally, you want them to do something that's really not about school or learning. This would be a great time to get them outside for 10 or 15 minutes at least and go outside and play. It would be a good time to do some artwork. The only thing that I really don't want people to do in brain breaks is to use any screen time. I don't want there to be TV or gaming so really avoiding the screen time during those brain breaks. And part of the reason for that is that we know it's way harder for kids to come off that kind of screen time and get focused again when they are done with their brain break and have to focus on online learning again. So we'll talk about screen time limits in a few minutes, but in terms of brain breaks right now, screen time should not be a brain break. So brain break should be anything that is out of the realm of learning, ideally physical, that gives them a break from learning. And then ideally a checklist system to check off their tasks. We, especially as kids are learning how to integrate this new process of learning, if they can have a way, like that's one of the things that may be useful about giving your list every day, your daily list of what your routine's going to look like, because they can literally check off snack, 10 o'clock snack. They can literally check off math. They can literally check off getting their art project done. So that ability to check off, and some kids you can do stickers to check off, you can just do checks to check off, whatever your kids are interested in doing. But that is another way of keeping kids focused in terms of what that routine and online learning expectation is. So that's what we're looking at in terms of routine and structure. questions about that?
I'm just wondering about single parents with special or high needs children at home, because like they're having to depend on these kids who don't even have the capacity
Exactly.
to do what they asked.
I'm going to actually specifically address that and talk about the special needs kids and what that looks like, because it is a completely different situation for them. And I'll come back to that. So if I don't answer that, come ask me again. So I want to specifically address screen time right now. So again, a lot of our kids have been getting way more screen time, way more random screen time, all the things we know that make it more addictive and harder to control. And that's just been survival. And I don't want people to go back and be self-critical around that in any way. It's just what we needed to do. We were hoping, and I think it's likely to happen, we're hoping that as structure came back in with online learning, that would assist people in sort of resetting healthier screen time expectations. So at this point, what you want to try to establish is no recreational screen time during school time. Ideally, do not let your kids get up in the morning and get on screen time to play Minecraft or text friends or whatever. It's much harder to get this ritual routine focus going if they start off with screen time and then have to get off, particularly because we're still dealing with a lot of that random addiction. So anything that's random is more addictive. So we're trying to get back to real structure around screen time again. So no recreational screen time before school. Ideally, no screen time during those brain breaks that we talked about, because it's hard to come back and focus after that. And then ideally trying to make it clear that screen time, recreational screen time, happens after school, after homework. So after school, after homework is when recreational screen time comes in. We're still talking a maximum of 2 hours a day. And so right now I am well aware that people are way over those limits, and that's just how they've survived. I'm thinking with the structure your kids have now, and without letting them use screen time during brain breaks, or before school, that it's really probably going to be pretty likely that you're going to hit that 2 hour break, because if they're done with school at 2, for example, and they have a little bit of homework and dinner, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to sort of manage that 2 hour screen time again, now that we have structure. So that's the expectations again now around screen time and why. And those of you who have the older kids, remember anyone 8 and older in terms of brain development are able now to think more abstractly. The older the kids are, the more I want you talking about a lot of these same concepts that people are finding to be part of brain development as well as brain function, so that you're literally explaining to your kids why you're limiting their screen time, why you're limiting your screen time during brain breaks, etc. So that there's a reason. It's not just control, that there's a reason why you're limiting at certain times and why you're allowing at certain times. Okay. Questions about screen time? And obviously you guys, screen time is not including learning and homework, because that's all they've got right now. So we're talking, that's why I'm labeling it as recreational screen time. No questions? All right.
What about TV?
Same. That would be considered recreational screen time.
Okay.
So no TV at brain breaks. no TV at lunch, for example, because they'll have a harder time sort of turning back to focus again on their learning. So TV would fall under that.
So I have a question, Candice, because like our teachers will send links to brain breaks, like on YouTube, their dancing videos and things like that. Would you say to not do those because it is technically screen time?
I would say that I would just warn parents that I don't think that's a bad idea. What they're trying to do probably is get your kids physical, trying to
Yeah.
get them to use different parts of their brains, which I think are great. I think what it does, though, is it provides another level of supervision for parents that I think can be challenging, because kids could do that 15-minute YouTube brain break that the teachers are giving them links to, but then they could also flip right into, and are flipping right into, doing Minecraft.
Okay.
So I think it's not a bad thing. I'm just wanting parents to be aware that they probably have to supervise that to be sure that they don't get hooked into doing other things after their brain break.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, screen time, we're done. We're okay with that for now, people. Okay. I'm a little bit hoarse, you guys, from the smoke, so if you can't hear me, let me know. All right, so one of the things you want to do now that's going to be super important with online learning is really encouraging your kids as quickly as possible to ask questions and ask for clarification from their teacher specifically. It's really tempting, particularly if you're sitting there with your kids, for you to do that work for them, or for them to look to you to ask the teacher questions. And I really think it's important, because we do not know how long this is going on, that this skill is one of the skills that's going to make or break the effectiveness of online learning. That you really encourage your kids, even your little guys, your kindergarten, first, second graders, to ask questions or clarify information with their teachers directly online. Now, the other thing that I want to remind people I'm going to be talking about later, so I'll bring this up again, but one of the things that has happened over the last generation is one of the life skills that our kids have not gotten is accessing outside resources, meaning anyone outside their parents. And that has really diminished their capacity to function in the adult world when they launch. And so we've been encouraging people to work on having kids access outside resources more often and earlier for several years now, trying to bridge that gap that we found. And so this is actually a positive thing for online learning, is that your kids are going to be in a position where they really need to practice that skill. So really try to encourage them to do that themselves. Like, you can sit with them while they ask questions to give them moral support, but I really want them to actually do that kind of connection with their teachers on their own. Okay, so questions about that? Okay, we know that right now it literally does take weeks to get this new process of learning in place, integrated. And so while we're waiting for that to integrate, I want people to be clear that you may need to have some kind of reinforcement or impetus to try to keep those routines and learn those processes. So is that, the older the kids are, the sort of farther out those rewards could be. So for your high school kids, you can actually have them be focused on getting to graduation or getting to that next level of high school. The younger the kids are, the more immediate it has to be. So for your little ones, it's probably not going to be something like even the end of the week or the end of the quarter. It's like, this is the reward you get for getting through today's schoolwork. Maybe even less for them. This is the reward you get for getting through the morning of schoolwork. Now, like with any form of reward, it can actually undermine developing that sort of self-organization, self-reliance, if you use it too much. So we're talking about using it initially for just establishing these rituals and routines. As your kids get weeks into this, you should be gradually backing off. So if you were rewarding after the morning, you might reward after the full day. If you were rewarding after the full day, you might reward after the full week. So that eventually the reinforcement drops off and the integration is there, and they are doing it from a place of self-direction, self-motivation, rather than being externally contexted, which is what we don't want in the long run. But we're just using it as one of the processes that could help speed up integration right now. Okay. Questions about reinforcement reward? Okay. Big one that everybody brings up are the social learning opportunities. And so it's not just socialization that your kids are missing by not doing on-site. They're missing social learning. So anytime that you can arrange learning pods, a lot of people are doing learning pods now where there are anywhere between, well, I've seen up to 10, a group of learning pod of 10, but most of the learning pods are 3 to 6 people where parents are getting together and having kids learn online together. Those are learning pods. And those are helpful for social learning. So if you don't have that ability or access to that, even sharing learning over Zoom or FaceTime with your kids. So again, that would be another way of extending that expectation of your kids learning material from online learning. So they could do 30 minutes of a 45-minute thing, and then maybe for 15 minutes they could hook up with some other kids on Zoom or FaceTime and talk about what they learned, or how to do a project, or how to do a worksheet, so that they're getting some of that social learning opportunity. And then the other thing you might think about would be homework dates. Like, can we after school set up time for 2 or 3 kids to get together and actually do 30 minutes of homework or their worksheets as a way of getting that social learning experience? Okay. So questions about that piece? So I don't know how many of your parents have the older kids, and by older kids I'm saying late middle school, probably more likely high school. But the other thing that we are having to build in that is important now in terms of looking to the future for college applications, job opportunities, etc., are what they're calling passion projects. Passion projects are where your kids are getting real life experience from world systems. And so we're looking at things like volunteering. Some of the kids are working, which is great because they're getting some of that experience through that. Just FYI, and I think it's in your notes, that there are a couple of websites that you can actually look up volunteer opportunities that I listed for you, so that your kids can see if they can get some kind of experience that they can put on either job applications or college applications. Those are what we're calling the passion projects, something they're interested in that they can use for future reference. It also, we know, really helps kids keep focused as they get older. That sense of feeling useful or having some unique contribution is really huge for keeping kids involved in school in general. It makes it a lot harder when that access isn't there or they're not around other kids who are demonstrating that access. So we want to be sure that kids are still getting exposed to those passion projects in their home learning. The next thing I want to talk about is joining forces with other parents. So this probably has more to do with parents than it does kids right now. It is exhausting and sometimes almost impossible to play this role, and we'll talk more about this in a second, when you are home with other kids, home trying to work from home, etc. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging people to do is to see if they can make connections with other parents where they are using each other for ideas that would make the learning easier or more successful, or support, just some place to talk about challenges. Just anytime you can normalize, it takes some of the stress off. And then thirdly, expertise. And what we're seeing is that some of these parents who have found this approach of joining forces have worked it out where they are doing their pod learning. And one parent, for example, may be better at math. And so on Tuesdays, that parent works with the kids and focuses on math. On Thursday, another parent is better at the language arts, and so they are working with kids on that. They have another parent who may be doing art. So that you're using parental expertise rather than feeling like every parent has to try to demonstrate that expertise with their kids. So that's what we're talking about joining forces. Okay, anything around that. So engaging with your kids on what's working, not working. A huge piece of this now is psychological. And again, I'm wanting your kids to learn self-assessment. I'm wanting your kids to learn self-correction. I'm wanting them to learn communication skills. These are all lifelong learning skills. So part of this process that what is provided as a result of it is that a lot of these skills that we don't ordinarily have to work on so intentionally are something that's going to be a necessity for online learning successfully in your home. So you are going to encourage your kids to talk about, what's working, what's not working, what are some of the emotions they're having, what are they excited about, what are they struggling with, and so on, so that they're talking about not just the negative things, but the positive things that they're experiencing as well. But wanting them to communicate that, all of that sort of processing that they're doing, so that they aren't getting overwhelmed and not having any place to process. Once that happens, then we're going to encourage them to be sharing the information they're sharing with you with teachers. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to talk about what to expect from teachers. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what you can expect from teachers, ideally, of course, would be the curriculum, the structure that your kids should be getting in that period of 6 hours. Also feedback in regards to clarity of assignments. I want your kids to give feedback. I want you to give feedback about, are the assignments that they're doing, are the online lectures they're doing, are they clear? Are you understanding them? Are your kids able to understand them? So you should be giving feedback to teachers about that. You should be giving feedback to teachers about the things and supplies that you need to be successful at whatever project they're doing. A lot of the teachers are not conscious of the fact right now, because this is new to them as well, that all of the things that were just there at school, pens, pencils, rulers, markers, whatever it might be, different kinds of paper, that was just something they had access to. So without thinking, they may be giving assignments to your kids that in a home setting, you don't have the things and supplies that your kids could successfully complete that project. So being sure that you're giving feedback to teachers about that so they become more conscious of what those assignments look like and are they realistically going to be successful with what kids may have available to them in their home setting. You're also going to talk about workload. So I've already heard parents going both ways on this. For some parents, they're feeling like the workload is too heavy for their kids to be able to accomplish realistically in a day, in a week, whatever it may be. For some people, they're really feeling like the workload is too easy or too light. And as a result of that, they're having a harder time keeping their kids focused because their kids are getting bored because it's so light. So teachers need feedback from you about workloads, what's working and not working in terms of workload. Now, with that said, I also want to be sure that, for your special need kids especially, this goes back to the question earlier, that ideally there should already have been meetings or at least meetings scheduled for your kids with special needs. In those meetings, there should also be plans for how they're going to meet those needs other than as parents meeting those needs, and accommodations that your kids get if they're on 504s or IEPs. So parents should be expecting that special needs students are going to have different accommodations than other kids, and that should be well documented and spoken. Not just assumptions or not just assuming kids aren't going to be able to do it. It's like, well, if they're not going to be able to do it, then what are we going to do instead? Or what are the ways they can do it successfully? So do not feel like because it's online learning that means that your special services are not something that they have to provide. They still have to provide special services for kids with special needs. So that communication and that kind of direct contact is super important to happen, and super important to be communicating what's working and not working. And from teachers and from other resources that you're using, it's really important that you have a sense that you're being considered. The other thing I'm hearing from parents, and heard last spring a lot, was they felt like that there wasn't much open consideration of what they were sharing with teachers. And I think ideally you're going to see a difference in what's happening this fall around that, because with a lot of the summer teacher training that your teachers were getting around online learning, one of the things they are talking about is being more proficient at being able to actually get that information from parents and students, and then actually how to use that information to make their learning more effective. So you should expect that if you have feedback for your teachers, that you will be considered, and that in that consideration, ideally, you would start to see some kind of self-correction in the feedback you gave. For example, if you were saying the workload was too light, you might see some kind of process where for kids that seemed too light, that they had some extra work to do during that time. Or if it was too heavy, that you would see they cut back on an expectation within a day. So you should be expecting consideration of your feedback. You should be expecting change as a result of your feedback, ideally. If you feel like you are not getting that consideration or feedback, it's important that, number one, you go to the teacher first. That is your first place to go. If that doesn't feel like you're getting needs met, then contact your principals. Your principal is the next place to go to say, we're having these struggles, we've communicated this to the teacher, we're not getting the support we need to try to manage this. So principal's next. And if you still feel like you aren't getting needs met, then you go to administration. And that would be superintendent. You're probably going to be in touch with the assistant superintendent. That's usually who would do it. But be sure you go teacher, principal first and see if you can get those needs met. So that's who you are going to connect with. Did that answer the question for the person earlier who was asking what you do around special needs kids? And if not specifically, what are you thinking or wanting?
I think it did. I was just like the structure part, like how is a single parent supposed to develop structure when they're at work all day? You know, that's my case.
Well, so this is one of the things I'm going to talk about just really quickly before we get off the teacher thing. I want to add one more thing, you guys. Be sure that you keep a log, a little on a piece of paper somewhere, that you log when you've talked to the teacher, what you've talked to the teacher about. If you end up talking to the principal, log that in as well. But it's super important that as you're trying to get some needs met, if you're struggling, that you have documentation of what those communications have been, coming both directions, ideally, and when they happened. Okay. So, so let's talk. I think now I want to kind of shift. So that's kind of the structural stuff, you guys. And then there's the more, what I would call psychological changes or shifts people have to make around this. And so the question that you just asked, April, about how do these single parents work from home, provide the rituals and routines, etc. It's like, I would say one of the first things I want to make really clear, and that I think has been stressful last spring and already stressful again now, is that there are expectations, no question. There are expectations that parents will be involved in trying to make online learning successful. On the other hand, you are not the teacher, and you are not expected to be the teacher. You're expected to sort of set the stage for learning. You're expected to help the kids do things like log on. You're expected to, the younger the child is, of course, you're expected to provide some level of supervision to keep them available for as long as you can. And again, as long as you can, and give feedback. It's like, this is the piece, and it's why I really want people to have that realistic expectation about maximum student participation per day, so that you can take some of that pressure off of, am I really supposed to take 6 hours a day and keep my kids focused? It's like, no, that is not a realistic expectation. So
I have a question about that, Candice. I feel like
yes.
I'm dealing with a kindergartner myself, and they expect her to participate every single day from 8:30 in the morning until almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And either that or she won't be counted as in attendance. They did give us the option to have a blended instruction, so it could be online guided learning or on your own. But I feel like, as a parent who also is trying to work from, not even from home, but also from somebody who is having to utilize other outside resources for her child to use school. We have no internet at our house, so we utilize our community center. So she goes on Tuesdays, Thursdays to school there, and then childcare, which doesn't allow her to do school on Mondays and Wednesdays. So when we get home, I'm having to transition from being at work all the way to now I'm helping her. I'm going to have to instruct her because her guided instruction isn't, and all it is a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And so I feel really I don't want to say burdened, but like overwhelmed with.
Absolutely. I think
am I
both. I would say both. Honestly, Beth, I think it is a burden and I think it is overwhelming. And so this is exactly where there has to be feedback, and why I want you guys to have that expectation, because you're among many parents in that situation, believe me.
Oh, I
the
know.
majority of parents are in that situation, and so that is an unrealistic expectation. And so I would start with your teacher about this is, and being really clear about this is the situation we're in, and this is what you can realistically expect from us.
Well, and the other thing I struggle with is, so I guess I'll use my daughter again as we're all kind of struggling with technology, right? And
Right.
I'm trying to find different avenues of communication between her teacher and myself, and I am not getting responses back, and I don't
In
know
terms of emails, is that what you're
yeah,
doing?
email, or so they utilize Google Classroom, and they have a messaging format. So I've tried messaging on there.
And you're
And
still not getting feedback?
I've gotten one response, and I had asked for a Google Classroom code so I could download it on the only platform we have that has internet service, so she can do school at home on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I got you don't need a Google Classroom code, call the helpline. And I felt like I'm trying to do my best here. I'm trying to be successful at work, and I'm trying to help my daughter learn. I just need one little thing.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I would say is, part of this is it's going to be taking incredible patience and grace for yourself, for your kids, for your teachers. Everybody is freaking overwhelmed, including the teachers. And so I want it clear that you are doing the best you can. I want you to communicate that. I want you to log your communications. Obviously you do, because you've got them in emails and your Google format. And then I think the next thing is I would actually go ahead and contact the principal if you've tried the teacher and you're not getting the feedback you need. So go ahead and contact your principal and just say, here's the situation we're in. Here's the messaging we're getting about expectation, and that is not a realistic expectation of what we can do in our home.
Yeah. But I feel like I honestly, I don't have the words, and I know that a lot of families are struggling with this. And I
know.
feel like I have no advice to advocate for yourself as a parent for your child, because I feel like we're all kind of getting the runaround, and the expectations weren't set clear, or how do we even go about communicating? We were told that we have to communicate with our students' teacher twice a week, but in the avenues that we find acceptable or common are not being responded or met. And I know that I'm not the only one that kind of struggles with.
You really aren't. You really aren't, Beth. And that's why I'm saying, at the very least, I want you guys to know what the expectation is, so that you can take that pressure off yourselves.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want you feeling like you've let your daughter down, or that you're not doing enough as a parent, or, it's like that has to come off you guys, because that's going to impact your health and well-being. It's going to impact how you are with your kids, which is going to impact all the family dynamics. It's like, we just can't go down that road. So that's why, at the very least, you guys keep communicating with each other about what you're able to do and not do, and what you're struggling with. And then I do encourage you, because I think numbers help. So if 2 or 3 of you can sort of sign on together and talk about what you're struggling with, that may make a difference as well. So
that's a great idea, Candice. That is to have
yeah.
kind of a small group of people who have kids in the same grade and say, how are you dealing with, that's a great idea.
Yes, yes. And then having that information shared with teacher, and I would CC it to principals. Just maybe under the circumstances, just go ahead and CC it. So it's not I have a problem, that this is what's going on. So those principals are sort of tracking what's happening with you guys. So I'm way more concerned about you guys being patient and having grace for yourself and your kids. It's like, I don't want the focus to be, are we doing what the school needs from us or what the teacher needs from us? It's like, I want you to think about what it is that you can do, what it is you are doing, and stay really patient. That we're talking, this takes literally weeks to get integrated in a new process. And so I want you realistic about that, so you're not frustrated with your kids, you're not frustrated with yourselves, you're not being critical of yourself or your kids. So what I'm asking ideally is that you hold that routine. Try to keep the routine. If you can keep the routine to some extent, that's all I ask. And for those of you who are in the situation you're in, Beth, that is your routine, that they have 3 days of school and 2 days without. That's your routine. And you will be clear that you will keep that routine. So, keep communicating what you're struggling with and what your realities are, but be sure that's based in some kind of realistic expectation for yourself and for your kids. Okay, did that answer enough for you for now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So clearly, it's obvious, the younger your kids are, the more supervision they need. And that's why it was a relief for me to get that information from the state education office, because I think, to be really clear, that if you are working from home and you have to supervise the learning of a kindergarten first or second grader, you may not be able to do more than 60 minutes a day. And in this case, they're talking 45 minutes a day. That may be the best you can do right now in terms of having some kind of ritual and routine at home. And so I kind of want to talk about this balance piece, because part of this is, I want people really clear, there's not going to be balance. There is no way to do what's being asked of families right now and have some kind of what we would call healthy balance. It's not going to be balanced. What you're going to have to get good at is recognizing on any particular day, at any particular time, where the priority for the system needs to lie. And on some days, that priority is going to be your work, because you have a meeting at work that you have to attend, or a project that has to get done, or whatever that might be. And that is not, and it's not realistic to expect that you will attend to your second graders 6 hours of learning and try to do a full-time job. That is not going to work. There will be no balance around this. So as you work on this, just be clear that every day you are going to assess what it is you need to do to try to sort of keep some level of function in your home by prioritizing whatever needs to be prioritized. Now, with that said, what I do want to warn people about is that online learning is going to be challenging. It's going to take a long time to integrate. I do want you to have that patience and grace. I also want you to have as positive an attitude as you can about it, because what we know is that kids definitely pick up the energy that parents bring into this. So I would much rather have you be able to focus with your kids for an hour a day on this than to be frustrated, overwhelmed, anxious, angry, and have that be the energy that your kids pick up about online learning. So try to keep your attitude about online learning as positive as possible, so that that's what you're projecting to your kids about this process while it's getting integrated. And then this is where the flexibility comes in. The routine I want you to get up. I want you to be committed to getting on each day you are supposed to get on. I want you to have your sort of rituals and routines about breaks and snacks, etc. A learning space. I also want you to be incredibly flexible about tweaking whatever you need to tweak to make something work better for you guys. So try not to cross over into getting rigid, because if you start to get rigid about things, that's when you're going to start running into issues around rapport with your kids and your emotional connection to them. So keep that flexibility, keep that routine. It's okay to have frustration breaks. I want to make this really clear. This came up last spring for several families as well. When your kids are really frustrated and they are flooded, you guys, you can't push through that. They're done. So you have to be willing to take frustration breaks, and some of you are going to communicate to your teachers that this is about how long your kids can struggle with something new before they need a frustration break, and explain that's what you do. And so you want to teach your kids to take frustration breaks. When they're frustrated, it's okay. So I don't want you to have that rigid, well, the expectation is I've got to keep them focused for this 45-minute online lesson. If they're getting frustrated, you're taking a break, and you should be taking a break. So those are frustration breaks. Those are absolutely okay. They're a priority. Focus on what your kids are learning this year. Don't get too caught up in they aren't getting enough math, they aren't getting enough reading, or not getting this or science or whatever it might be. Focus on what your kids are getting that is uniquely positive about online learning. And there are uniquely positive things they're getting in terms of lifelong learning skills. They may be getting more lifelong learning skills in online learning than they would have with on-site learning, because they're having to learn to be self-sufficient. They're having to learn to organize. They're having to learn to access outside resources. They're getting levels of resiliency that they may not have had in on-site learning. They're having to learn how to communicate more clearly. These are all things that, for in terms of lifelong learners, are far more important than if they're getting an extra hour of math a week. So try to remind yourselves not to let your own anxiety about what they're learning get in the way of really assessing some of the positive aspects that they'll be developing through this process. The other thing I want to remind people that is really important, and it was part of the reason why I think that the State Office of Education put this out, is there is no question, there's never been a question, that what you gain from one-on-one instruction and online learning sort of situation is much more efficient than on-site learning. So even though your kids were doing 6 hours of on-site learning, they can probably accomplish in half that time what they were accomplishing, and in terms of when they were on site, because they aren't dealing with management, they aren't dealing with 25 bodies and logistics. They aren't passing out papers to 25 kids. They aren't. So remind yourselves that it's way more efficient. So even though you may be frustrated that you can only stay focused for a couple hours with your kids, or anyone can, you're probably getting just as much accomplished as you would be on site. So be realistic about what your expectation is and what you can actually achieve. And that's the communication that you have got to share with people. Okay. So questions about that piece. Okay, the other thing I want is I really, really, really want to be clear that your kids are going to be okay, you guys. This is hard. This is hard for you. I'm way more worried about your kids not being okay if people are freaking out. If they have a challenging year in education, they're going to be okay as long as their social emotional needs are met and they have stability. That resiliency is going to manifest. So I want you sort of clear it in your own sense of selves that as challenging as this can be, and that you may see struggle for your kids and for yourselves, you're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. This is okay. And everybody's just going to do the best they can, period. And that's all anyone can ask for anyone. So now, with that said, I think this is why I wanted to just talk a little bit about self-care. It's like this is so key to how this is going to work out for your kids, because your attitude is going to have a big impact, and your own resiliency is going to have a big impact on how well the online learning is going to go for your family. So that means you have got to prioritize yourselves as well in terms of doing the self-care you need. That means you have to sleep. It is important you're getting enough sleep. You have to eat regularly and healthfully. It's important that your nutrition is focused on. Ideally, you need time for yourself, and ideally away. And again, I know it's harder as a result of COVID to do both, but I am seeing that a lot of what I would consider a necessity for parenting, which is self-care, it's not a luxury, is dissipating. And I'm really wanting people to be clear, you have got to have quiet time. If that's in a bathtub, if that is going for a walk once a day, it's like you need time away from your kids, ideally time away from the house. I don't want you comparing yourself to other people. Again, I have more concern about this because they're of social media. So if you are feeling like on social media, you're getting a sense that everybody else is being a way better supervisor or facilitator of their kids' learning, get off your social media. Do not compare yourself to other parents. Everybody is doing the best they can. Every family is different. Every situation is different. Every kid is different. There's just not room for that kind of comparison. So don't compare yourself to anybody else. Do the best you can. Give the feedback you need to your teachers. Ideally, if you can have another focus this year besides school, look for one. If that's taking a class of your own, if that is in a book group, a Zoom book group if you have to, if that is learning a new skill, if that's knitting, I don't care what it is, have some other focus right now other than your kids and schooling. And in terms of the bigger process, the first priority is fun, you guys. And we've talked about this in so many different arenas already, that the rapport you have with your kids is key to communication. It's key to discipline. It's key to learning. It's key to everything. And so if there was anything that I would tell you as a priority, is that it would be that you are finding ways to have fun together. So that's all I've got to share with you guys. So what would be useful for you now? Did I answer all the questions, you guys? Did they get answered as we talked?
I think all the ones that were in the chat box got answered.
Okay.
But I think there were some in the beginning that you had wanted to revisit in case you didn't quite answer.
Yeah, which ones were those, and do those people need more info?
The ones that I read at the very beginning were from Deanne Harris. They were about the max requirements for online virtual, if it included homework or not. And I think you did answer that you weren't sure about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm assuming not, but I think that would be one of those things to clarify with each teacher, what the expectation is. Now, the other thing that I would have people clarify is that for most of your group, the kids are younger, but you may have older kids within those families. And one of the things that's a problem in even on-site school is that there's no communication between teachers. So when you have one teacher, you can talk about workloads, you can talk about expectations around homework, etc. But when you start to get into middle school and high school, and you're having these kids interacting with 4 or more teachers a day, the teachers are not communicating with each other. This has been an issue forever, where teachers will assign, for example, homework without considering who else is assigning homework throughout a day. And so I, again, would just be really good about communicating with teachers about how much homework kids are getting total, how much time they have available to do total, and then talk again about workloads and realistic expectations.
Do you think it would be helpful for parents to maybe suggest to teachers or school staff to also consult with like local colleges? Because I recently received a survey from Washington State University, which I attended. That's where I got my bachelor's. And they were trying to assess student workload because they were having such a failure rate, basically, because there was so much, because there's people who are working full-time and raising children and maintaining a household. And then on top of that, they're expected to attend their classes. If they're going full-time, they're attending their classes. The expectation was 40 hours a week per class. That's just not possible.
Right.
So they actually pared it down, and now they're expecting, I think it's like
less. No, I think it's a great idea. I don't think they're going to communicate much with each other. Just, again, it's that time and communication challenge for themselves, because they aren't together anymore. Even if they were, it's challenging. So I think that for sure giving the feedback, I don't think it would be a bad idea to do that. What we do know is just what you're saying, is that we see it in high school and middle school as well, particularly high school, where the kids are getting way too much out of school expectation in terms of homework, and that the teachers aren't aware of that. And then at some point, the kids just stop. They just give up. They get so far behind that they just give up completely. So it is an issue in high school as well. And, you know, it could be that this may provide, for the first time, legitimate feedback that these teachers can start to assess that as well, April, which would be great. It's cool to hear that WSU did that.
Yeah, I think Olympic College did something similar too, but I haven't attended there for a long time. So
yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if that was state driven, or that's good.
It might have been state driven because of the fact that so many people are using student loans, and you know, they're paying a lot of money to attend those classes and not getting anything out of them because they don't have the time to be as productive as is expected of them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. All right, so the questions in the box were answered. Anybody else have questions, comments?
I do.
Yeah.
So one of my questions is like, what type of advice would you have for families with small spaces that can't really provide
That's why I'm saying, be as,
their
you know,
children?
exactly. It's like even a simple thing like having a corner of a table that is set up that is stays there, So it's just getting that visual, physical cueing that we're looking for. A corner in a room.
I set
Go
up
ahead.
a little table and then I just use the post-it boards that fold, the folding post-it,
Perfect.
and put
Perfect.
3 of them together for 3 desk
That's
areas.
ideal. That's ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
don't
also,
feel like it has to be anything extravagant or even a full space. Just the best you can do to get that cueing.
mhm. And some of our families, like I know that have 3 or more kids, even 5, 6 kids in their home that are all in different age
I
range
know.
and are trying to, work with the small space that they have and trying to create, some space for their children. I know that that's definitely a big
Yeah,
frustration for some of our families.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, and again, I think even being sure that people are aware of that, the struggle of that. The thing is that in terms of supervision, the thing is that what they're starting to see is that some of the older kids are actually supervising younger kids in their educational process, which has been actually working for some people because for the kids, the older kids, it gives them a sense of purpose and usefulness. So, play with your different developmental stages and how that can actually enrich the learning of the
Mhm.
larger, family setting as well in terms of expectations. But
That's a good idea.
again, I think everyone has to be really clear. It's like some of you have one child, some of you have one child who's old enough and temperamentally is self-directed. Some of you have 4 children and a high need child, a child with special needs. You are not going to have realistically the ability to do what someone with one child who's self-directed can do. It's just not going to happen. It's why I don't want you guys to compare. Everybody is going to do the best they can with what they've got. And you do not have to carry around shame, and you do not have to rationalize that beyond giving feedback that this is what's happening.
Okay. And then my second question is, how could we, I guess, try to avoid online burnout? Because I know everything is done virtually right now, and I know a lot of youth are just burnt out on using, online virtual platforms. So like our organization, we're trying to figure out how to engage families, how to engage youth, but
Yeah.
they go to school.
That's why, do you remember earlier when I was saying use other ways, especially when your kids are losing focus with their online learning? It's like find other ways for them to learn. If that means going out and going on a hike to learn about something, if that means cooking to learn about something, if that means like look for other ways of learning, practical learning. It's interesting. Other countries are way better at this than we are. And I'm trying to think of, let me just see if I can look it up. My daughter was just talking about something to look up that I think would be practical again for you guys. There's a term for it. Yep. Okay, it's project-based learning. So, you might just Google project-based learning and see what comes up for ideas for ways to sort of feed that more. Okay, anyone else? Okay, we good?
I'm not sure if this was addressed or not, but there was a question about what kinds of things you recommend for talking to the child. The child can
It wasn't
obviously,
addressed. It's like, sometimes if you can just have sort of a regular check-in at some time during the day, it could be breakfast, it could be dinner, and just identify the best thing and the worst thing that happened during the day. You don't even have to necessarily talk about it in terms of specifically about their online learning, but just trying to get that communication going about self-assessing how they're managing something. As kids get older, dialogue journals work really well and are sometimes a more effective way, because kids aren't having to deal with facial expression, tone of voice. Dialogue journals would be, for example, you'd say, your child might write, I was really frustrated when the teacher said we had to do this. And then you would write back something along the lines of, that does sound frustrating. Is there anything that would be helpful? And then they might write back something else. And so sometimes just having a dialogue journal will get communication going for kids who are not as self-disclosing because of that emotional impact. So any way that you can build in some kind of check-in is useful.
Yeah, I think this was in relation to the emotional struggles with the frustration and losing their interest in learning because they're just so frustrated. And
I know. And that's why I really want to give people permission to take those breaks as you need to, you guys, because the other thing I want people to be conscious of, if you haven't heard me talk about flooding before, is that when people are in those high states of emotion, and oftentimes it's your kids and yourself, you're both what we call flooded. So when you're in those high states of emotion, you shoot out adrenaline. When you shoot out adrenaline, you go into fight or flight. And the flight is literally just wanting to get away, which a lot of your kids will try to do. Or the fight is run. And flight is also emotional, or mental, I should say, where basically your brain just kind of goes into fog state, and you really can't hear what people are saying. You really can't respond to what people are saying to you. It's really what I call the Charlie Brown, the moi, 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 moi state, where that's all you hear and it's how all you can process. And so it takes 20 to 30 minutes for your body to reabsorb enough adrenaline for your brain to be able to process. So if you keep trying to push through, or you're making your kids try to stay with something, you're probably only extending that flooding beyond that 20 or 30 minutes, because you're reflooding each time they get frustrated again. And so ideally, you take those breaks, you be sure it is 20 to 30 minutes, and then look for a way we call a soft startup. You look for a way to reintroduce that information in a way that may not so quickly flood them. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So are we done for today then, you guys?
I think I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand.
Okay. All right. All right. And one of the things I would say, you guys, is check in with your people, because those of you in your groups, as for each tribe representative, you guys can get back to me too. So you can text me, email me with questions as this process goes along, and then I can get back and you guys can get back to your people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you so much.
Continue. You're so welcome, you guys. All right. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for watching. This presentation was hosted by the SPIPA Healthy Families Program in partnership with parent educator and parenting counselor Candyce Bollinger. For more information about Candyce, please visit her website at https://CandyceLundBollinger.com or look her up on Facebook at facebook.com/CandyceLundBollinger. For more information about SPIPA and the Healthy Families Program, please visit our website at https://www.spipa.org/family-support, or visit our Facebook and Twitter pages at facebook.com/South Puget Planning or twitter.com/spipa_org. The SPIPA Healthy Families Program serves the Chehalis Tribe, Nisqually Tribe, Skokomish Tribe, Squaxin Island Tribe, and Kitsap and Pierce counties.